Real quickly, my name is Rob Randall. I am a staff security specialist here at VMware. So essentially my role is to talk security. Serge Maskalik, who was supposed to be here, just had a baby on Friday, so he is not going to make it. Actually, his wife had the baby, but he's still going to be there to support her and not going to be able to make it. So it's going to be me for this session. So I get to do all the talking. And by the end of the week, after all the talking we're going to be doing, I don't think I'll be able to do this again for a while. Typical quick disclaimer. You'll see this in every session. Again, if I talk futures, if I talk anything that may be coming, it is just that. It's a future, nothing on specifics. If I give you a date, that's purely by accident, and then the date doesn't mean anything. It's just soon. You know, think of it soon or a few quarters out or something like that. But everything is just futures and just that. Again, pricing, what have you. Again, nothing nothing has been fully specifically for anything new that we talk about. Pricing or any of that has not been locked down. So, quick agenda of what we're going to talk about here. Man, I get started. Now everybody's coming in. So we're going to talk quickly kind of the legacy approach to securing a virtual data center, kind of what the ways to do that, what are the tools, what are the components to that, and why that tends to be very difficult, kind of to do it outside, if you will, the virtual environment. And then from that, we'll kind of talk about the vShield products themselves. We'll talk about vShield Edge. We'll talk about vShield App. vShield Endpoint is kind of out of scope for this presentation. vShield Endpoint, you can go ahead and see that in this SE7813. It's showing it's going to be 3 times. You got the opportunity to go see that. So that's a real good, cool product that's coming here very soon. But anyway, it's one of those things you definitely want to check out. Use cases. We've got a number of use cases here, from the cloud to the extranet. This is going to be the fun stuff, I think, that we'll start talking about how we can leverage this. What are the things that we can do to leverage these, the cool capabilities that both Edge and App actually give you. So, again, the data center needs to be secured at our different levels. When you think of security, and as security folks, what we're going to think of is defense in depth, right? We're securing at multiple levels. And again, you've got your different layers of defense is another way to put it. In our case, we're going to talk perimeter security, internal, as well as endpoint security. When we talk about perimeter security, what's that for, right? To keep the bad guys out. That's our hard shell around our data center, typically, around our perimeter. Again, tools you're going to use there, firewall, VPN, IPS, there's load balancers out there. But the key thing is to keep the bad guys outside and to keep your important critical data inside, away from the bad guys, if you will. But the next step is to do that internal security. The problem is if you only go with the perimeter security, then once somebody is in, or if you have an internal user, you've got that kind of, it's the old analogy that people use, right? The candy shell, right? You have the hard shell on the outside and the soft center inside. So we need protection inside as well. A lot of people kind of talk about this as kind of the perimeterless network. So you're going to have perimeters, if you will, though, but they're inside the network. And that's where you're going to typically leverage things like VLANs, subnet-based policies. You're going to leverage your interior web application firewalls, DLP, other tools to protect against, if you will, that insider threat. Last piece is endpoint security. So now we're getting deeper and deeper into the network, right? So your endpoint security are going to be things that are on the endpoint. Desktop AV agents, desktop IPS, IDS, DLP agents that run on the endpoint. Real good tools and real important, again, in that defense in-depth strategy. The key thing is if you're doing that from a legacy perspective within the virtual data center, typically what you end up with are, number one, is from a perimeter perspective, you still have your big perimeter, but internally you end up with these kind of air-gapped pods. And those air gaps, we call it air gaps, and those can be separate physical clusters, and we see that a lot, for example, when folks in them within their DMZ or within their internal network, and they have these separate different clusters for whatever reason, for compliance reasons, for security reasons. But the point is putting those in separate pods and then putting firewalls in between that. Now you can do this with VLANs. So if you wanted to still consolidate, but you didn't want, so within the virtual environments, and you didn't want to have all these air gap pods, but then you can start leveraging things like VLANs to separate. The problem with VLANs is they get very difficult to manage. You don't necessarily get the internal security from that either. The reason you set up VLANs is so traffic can get forced out to the physical network and then back in and routed through. But be sure nice if we can do this all from the virtualization layer as opposed to separating, with VLANs and those types of things. Again, rigid IP rules without context. So again, they're all network-based. There's no context in necessarily the applications that are running, the what you're specifically trying to protect. And then private clouds. There's really no kind of solution, when we talk about kind of the legacy approach. And again, the key thing here is when you start talking about this, it becomes very, very difficult to really leverage the full benefits of virtualization when you start using these legacy tools and this legacy approach. So when you kind of bring it back and kind of why they don't work, number one, from a perimeter security perspective, you try to use these tools for your virtual data centers, what have you, gets very expensive. You got very rigid rules, firewalls. Again, we're not saying get rid of that perimeter security, though, completely. Again, you still want to have your physical firewalls out there around your core data center, right, around that main perimeter. But as you start moving in, we're not saying rip that out, but as you start moving inside, that's where we can really start to help. And that's where we can really leverage the benefits of virtualization to start actually getting rid of, even if you don't do the AirPods, but start getting rid of the VLANs, start getting rid of the blind spots of the inter-VM traffic. That's a problem we see in virtualization when you talk about the physical solutions. You don't see that inter-VM traffic. Even some of the current virtual solutions, even if you look at our current vShield Zones 1.0, that sees the internal traffic, but it can't do anything with it, right? So VM to VM traffic, it can't block that unless you're in VLANs and you force the traffic out and back in, and those types of things. So you end up with bottlenecks and things that have to kind of route through these different components. Endpoint security, what you end up with are performance issues in the virtual environment. You have all these agents. You want to start taking those off. You want to, again, maximize your resources. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about this in this session. Again, there's another session that's really good for this. Again, repeated 3 times, so you should have an opportunity to get there. But the key thing here is to stop dealing with the issues of having to put agents on all those different components. So we're going to talk about the vShield products and kind of what each of them do and what they're able to do. So the first piece is vShield Edge. And the key thing about vShield Edge is it's designed for protecting the edge of the virtual data center. So again, your physical data center, when you're talking your big physical data center, you're still probably going to use your physical big iron, big iron type firewalls, your hardware-based firewalls. But when you start talking virtual data centers, now we can start building these perimeters, if you will, around the virtual data centers. And vShield Edge is going to be able to provide that capability. And I'll get into detail kind of the different components there. The next piece is vShield App and Zones. Now, App and Zones are essentially same basic base functionality. vShield App is a more advanced version of vShield Zones, but with additional functionality. But the key thing about vShield App and Zones are the fact that they are VNIC level firewalls. So each VNIC is going to be able to provide a firewall, essentially, or have a firewall. The analogy I like to use is think of it as a physical switch or a physical firewall with an unlimited port density, so you can have as many ports as you want. And every port that you plug into has a firewall on it, a full stateful firewall. That's essentially what this is. This is leveraging the introspection APIs. If you're familiar, if you remember the VM safe APIs, that's what we're leveraging here. But the neat thing about this is now we can start doing logical zoning. So we can say this resource pool and this resource pool. There's no network constructs. They may all be on the same network, but we can create zones around, again, the more logical constructs as opposed to actually having to create networks around that and actually and create VLANs and create different layer 3 type networks. This is actually going to be able to provide VM to VM protection from within all the same broadcast domain all the way up the stack, though. So not just layer 2, but layer 3, layer 4, and all the way up to application layer protection as well in many components here. The last piece is that vShield endpoint. Again, key thing here is offloading that antivirus products. Again, I won't get into too much detail on it here, but the key thing here is performance gain first, and then as we go along with this, you'll be able to start seeing advantages of actually being able to do this, not just from a performance perspective, but security advantages because of the visibility that you get, because of the non-bypassability, I guess, is that a word? The fact that it's actually running down in the hypervisor as opposed to in each individual VM, you can protect it from the actual malware itself. The one problem with AV agents or any kind of agents in the endpoint is they're attackable just as well. If you can build it, quote, into the hardware, virtual hardware in this case, you actually makes it invisible to those securities or to the malware or the attackers that are going after that. And then vShield Manager manages all of this. And vShield Manager is the centralized management tool. The key thing about vShield Manager is The difference now between what we had before and what we have now is it's API-based. So we have REST APIs. So if you do see anything on vCloud Director, for example, it leverages the REST APIs of vShield Manager, for example, to deploy vShield Edge, which is part of vCloud Director. But the key thing is that you can start automating things. You may have an IDS solution, for example, and say that IDS solution detects some malicious traffic, and you want to go ahead and isolate a certain VM, that VM that actually is getting that malicious traffic. Why not have that IDS solution send a command, REST command, say, create a rule, isolate this VM. It can't access anything in or out, or in my network, but it can actually keep talking to that attacker. You may want to allow that to keep talking for forensics, right, and for investigative purposes. So you can allow that to keep going, but then isolate it from the rest of the network. So kind of a NAC type solution there as well. And again, whole goal here is securing the private cloud from end to end. Perimeter security challenges when we talk about virtualization cloud. So now the way we're going to kind of hit this from a product perspective, we're going to kind of talk about the challenges and then talk about the solution here. So we're talking about Edge and how this is going to deal with. So when you're talking about the perimeter security challenges, and the perimeters that we're talking about are these around these virtual data centers, kind of the internal perimeters, is the ability to kind of, again, secure that private and public cloud. So when you're talking about your public cloud that's out there and integrating those, you have to use kind of physical firewalls, again, VLANs and all of that. You end up either having, again, this air gap system, which is VLANs, is kind of, doesn't quite sound right, but if you think about it, you either have air gaps or you're going to have VLANs, but the key thing is you're still going to be relying on your physical security, your physical tools, the routing to force traffic in and out. And that's what we're doing here. And it becomes very difficult. Your mixed trust host becomes really difficult to actually force that traffic out and to truly protect that in the proper way. From a desktop perspective, even from View, from desktop, you have to get very expensive external load balancers, physical load balancers typically for, say, for example, our View Manager. vShield Edge can actually take care of that, but it gets very, very expensive when you start deploying that. So what vShield Edge does is it takes the best of all these features and builds those in to this vShield Edge appliance. Oops, that's the end. I thought it kept building. So some of the features of vShield Edge. So we'll talk about the features, and then again, we'll get into the use cases here. But vShield Edge, again, it's all the edge-based security services in one appliance. So it's going to have things like stateful inspection firewall. It's going to have network address translation. So this is going to be more like your standard edge-based firewall. But again, the edge moving into your network. Network address translation, DHCP, site-to-site VPN. So we have an IPsec VPN capability here. When we talk about the use cases, I think you'll kind of get a good idea of some things we can do here. And then web load balancing. Standard, basic Port 80 web load balancing today. But you can do some really interesting stuff from that perspective as well. There's another feature here, what we call edge port group isolation. This essentially replaces VLANs. Essentially what that's going to do. But your edge, your port groups now become your isolation zones, if you will, and we leverage some technologies to actually provide that isolation like you would for a VLAN without having to deal with the VLAN sprawl issue, without having to manage that. It's all managed automatically through the vShield Manager and through the vShield Edge appliance itself. And that's going to happen within the platform itself, and it's nothing that you have to do. Now, one thing to note about this is if you're using physical machines, port group isolation is not going to be an option for you today. You'll still need to use VLANs in that case. But for a fully virtual environment or a cloud environment, this is a really nice tool to start getting away from using all these VLANs. What we see in a lot of our providers' networks, for example, they're running out of VLANs, right? I mean, you're kind of limited, but you get enough customers on there, and they each have their own VLAN, you end up running out. This mitigates that issue. Detailed network flow statistics, again, for chargebacks, those types of things. Again, the policy management through the UI or the REST APIs, and we have a real nice plugin now for vShield Manager in the vSphere client. And then again, login auditing based on kind of your industry standard to slog. So from a better than physical security perspective, that's our goal here, right? We've leveraged virtualization to get better than physical in many ways. Why not get better than physical security as well? So if you kind of look at it from that perspective, big key benefits here, obviously the reduced cost and complexity, and again, very rapid provisioning when we're talking about private clouds. Again, you don't have to kind of, because it's virtualization aware, because it's actually aware of the vSphere environment itself, it speeds up your provisioning process. You can very quickly protect these machines. And again, when you talk about vCloud, it's going to actually automate all that for you. You basically just set up you set up your machine, you say deploy it, and it's automatically going to protect it, put it in the right zone. But when we start talking better than physical, it's auto-wired, if you will. As soon as it's plugged in again, port group, it's going to be automatically protected within that virtual data center, so you don't have to go through. If a VM goes offline, comes back online, it's, again, automatically protected. Especially when we start talking about vShield app, it becomes even more so, because no matter where that thing moves around, it's still going to be protected. And again, security built into the infrastructure, kind of mentioned vCloud Director, and then security solution for view capabilities. But then the rapid provisioning of security from a NAT, firewall, VPN, again, on an as-needed basis within that virtual environment. So you don't have to deal with the reconfigure your network, if you will, if you want to create a new quick security zone or something like that. And that's a real nice benefit there. So when we're talking about installing configure, it's supposed to be technical here, so let's kind of talk about kind of how this works. The key thing about vShield Edge is that it is installed per port group in your networking view. So we're talking standalone here. We're not talking in the context of vCloud Service Director doing it, but when you're setting it up and say you're not using vCloud for whatever reason yet, and you want to go ahead and use Edge, you're going to set it up on a per port group basis. So you have a vShield Edge that protects per port group. So you're going to have one edge per port group. Nice thing about this, so you can have a lot of these out there potentially, but the nice thing about them, they're really lightweight. They're 128 mega RAM. I think the footprint on disk is about 200 meg. It's pretty small. It's very quick. Actually, it's fully deployed right from the vShield manager, so you don't have to do a separate import or anything like that. It'll deploy it and set up the interfaces where they need to be connected to. But the key thing is it's going to create that logical perimeter based on that port group. The network isolation piece, or the port group isolation, do I mention that here? Oh, I don't see it on the slide here, but the port group isolation, again, will provide the layer 2 isolation around that port group, and then Edge will provide the layer 3 and higher for that. Again, two interfaces, external, internal. Internal goes into that protected port group. The external goes into the, quote, public network or the internet or what have you. But typically the public network is going to be your internal network, but you still want to protect this from your internal network. Again, standard policies from a firewall perspective, your 5-tuple policies, so source and destination IP, source and destination port, and your service. Nice thing is it performs NAT. So your VMs in your different virtual data centers have overlapping IP addresses and those types of things. So there's some nice capabilities there. IPsec VPN, again, this will talk, when we talk about the use cases, we'll kind of get some interesting use cases for the IPsec VPN from a virtual data center perspective. Typically, we think of it from a data center to data center. Why not do it from a virtual data center perspective? As well as, again, the load balancing capabilities for the servers hosted in that virtual data center. So now we'll talk about vShield app and kind of the challenges that it's going to address first. So again, the real challenges here, especially in a virtual environment, is that lack of visibility from a VM perspective. Not just the visibility, because we can get some visibility, but the ability to actually apply security from VM to VM, right? So from NIC to NIC, vNIC to vNIC, we want to be able to actually provide that security capability. And when you're talking about a standard physical firewall, or even many of the virtual firewalls that are out there, they can't necessarily do this. Now, we do have partners that do this type of thing with our VM-safe APIs, but this is the same. The issue here is about being able to provide that VM-to-VM protection. VLAN sprawl, again, we have our internal network. A lot of times, again, we don't have, if we want to provide those internal networks or data centers, we have to create a whole bunch of VLANs to provide that. Well, what if we just wanted to kind of keep it wide open, one big network, or maybe a few big networks? There's performance reasons around that, too. But from a security perspective, we can then start, again, creating these logical zones. And again, from a complexity standpoint, it becomes very difficult to deal with. From securing each VM boundary just can't be done, and that's kind of what we kind of hit on already earlier. So, vShield app, again, your protection for the network. So the features here, again, is this hypervisor level firewall. It's inbound and outbound connection controlled or applied at the VNIC level. And that's important, because you can have a VM with multiple VNICs. Each VNIC can have its own policy, which is pretty interesting too. So you can actually then provide kind of multi-homing potentially, but then still provide policies to prevent that from kind of talking or passing traffic between. Again, elastic security groups, if you will, they stretch as the virtual machines migrate. All that means is as the VMs are moving around, the policies follow them. Robust flow monitoring, Good policy management, again, simple, very relevant, based on logical groupings. They can create your own security zones, but you can also do it based on things like resource pools, data centers, clusters within the virtual environment, and then provide intra-VM policies within those pools as well. And then logging and auditing, again, just log, those types of things. But another thing, again, the UI or the REST APIs. The REST APIs become important, again, when we start talking about partner products, when you start talking about automation of deployment, those types of things. We can do this. And again, this is what vCloud Director is doing. It's leveraging those APIs to, for example, create a virtual data center and protect it all in one fell swoop. There's other places that we can potentially leverage this that we're not yet, but maybe sometime in the future that we can do these things. So, again, some of the key benefits here is the fact that you get complete visibility to the inter-VM traffic. Again, so the multi-trust zones on the same cluster, but leveraging it, even if it's all on the same network, you can say, you can have the VM in these logical security zones. Again, intuitive business language. When we talk better than physical, number one, it's that virtual firewall, again, with unlimited port density. So if you think of it from a physical perspective, it's somehow you have this physical firewall that that you can have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of ports for that matter, available for protection, and actually VM, protection between those ports as well. Hypervisor level introspection, again, access to that inter-VM traffic, topology independent. It doesn't matter as you're configured, your IP address changes in the VM, it doesn't matter. We see that IP address change, and we're going to go ahead and change our policy based on, basically automatically make the change of the policy. So you have a user that decides they're going to change their IP address to try to get around the firewall, something like that. It doesn't matter. vShield is going to see that and protect against that, so they can't spoof themselves around that. And again, the key thing here, from a cost perspective, is it's very, very inexpensive. We're talking software-based, right? So it's going to be a lot less expensive than buying all these physical firewalls and carving your network up into a bunch of different zones. So again, the install and configure here. Key thing to understand here is vShield app is installed on every host. So remember, Edge installs per port group, and you can have many edges, but you can have but you would have one port group. Say you have 10 hosts. Same port, you have to use a VDS or whatever, and you have the same port group across those hosts. You still need just one edge. With vShield app, you're going to install one on every single host. Doesn't matter how many port groups you have. That can protect all those and the individual VMs, but you do have to have it per host because it has to be able to access those introspection APIs to be able to do that. Intuitive policy constructs, again, containers from vCenter, resource pools, vApps, VMs, again, the clusters, data centers, we can use those to create our policies. If you get a chance, check out the lab, because you can see all this in action, by the way, and be able to kind of leverage this. Security groups, again, can be created by a grouping of vNICs. You can do this manually as well. So you can say, I want to create my own special security group. Maybe it's within one of those resource pools, but you wanted to carve that up even more. You can then create another policy based on the individual NICs within there. And then again, IP-based stateful firewall, but it also has this application layer gateway perspective. So things like ephemeral ports, dynamic ports that get opened up, so like Windows RPC or Sun RPC, whatever, you connect to the base port, and then it opens a high port. We will recognize that application level traffic and open up that high port dynamically. So for example, you're protecting, say, a Windows box, you don't have to have all these high ports open by default. Your network. So that's nice. So you can keep all those closed, and they'll only open based on per connection basis. And again, flow monitoring. This is really nice. It's funny. There's a lot of different use cases here that we can kind of leverage. Even some. There was an email going around internally. Somebody was looking. One of our customers was looking for the ability to see which of their VMs are talking to each other the most. Because what they found is, you put those two VMs on the same physical host, they perform a heck of a lot better because you never hit the physical wire and everything's going, over the memory backplane, right? So with the flow monitoring capabilities, we can do that down to the individual VM. So say you want to see which this VM and what it's talking to the most, you can do that. That also helps you from the perspective, all of a sudden you get a really chatty VM. Maybe all of a sudden it's talking out to the internet a whole lot. Maybe out to some botnet or something like that, some bot herder. You can see that, and then you can go ahead and create your policies, or clean that thing up, or take it off the network, or isolate it. Maybe you want to leave it open. So you just set a rule around that one VM saying it can't access any internal resources at all, but it can still go out to the internet to this one IP address that it's talking to. So it's kind of a NAC type here, but it's so individual that you can really lock this down and prevent it from talking to anything, infecting the rest of your network, but then you can investigate and see exactly what's going on. And then later, you can make a policy, that IP address, nothing can come in and out from that IP address. So, when to use vShield Edge, vShield App, or both? So I get this question a lot. Well, which applies where? How do I know what I'm using where? So Edge. For Edge is if you need to have dynamic environments that may have overlapping IP addresses, so like lab environments, those types of things. Again, cloud environments where you have multiple tenants and maybe they use the same internal IP addressing scheme, those types of things. This is where vShield Edge is going to come into play because it's going to isolate the from a layer 2 perspective, and then you can do things like NAT. So it'll provide NATing capabilities, so you can give it external IP addresses that it can NAT to, but that's it. But you can have multiple tenants, and maybe those are business units. Maybe these, when we're talking about the cloud or the public cloud, this is going to be different customers in that environment. But the key thing is, so it can do the NAT. Need your secure connectivity to an external network. So VPN capabilities. If you need a VPN from site to site, whether that be a partner network, whether that be your data center, maybe it's a remote office, branch office. You can set that up using this with Edge. Again, if you need web load balancing services, you're going to use that over vShield App. And again, if you need VMs quickly brought up and down with DHCP, this is going to provide your DHCP capabilities within those virtual data centers. So again, lab environments are typical areas where we see this. But also, again, this cloud-type environment where we're all moving is, again, our theme of the whole show, right? So this is an area as well. vShield App, if you want to get arbitrary, you want to start not worrying about all these network constructs or not have to carve your network up into a bunch of different physical, defined networks, if you will, you can do that with vShield App, again, using resource pools, VApps, et cetera, like we talked about earlier. If you want to zone based on your application, so you have a multi-tier app, and it's got a web zone, app zone, database zone, you can have one big network still. Frankly, they can all sit on the same host. They don't have to pass through, so you can still get some really nice performance if you wanted to do that. But you can still firewall to say, my web app can only, my web tier can only talk to my app tier over this port. My app tier can only talk to my database tier over another port. But my web tier can't talk to my app tier. Those types of things. So that's an area where you can do that again. You can do that also with vShield Edge, but I think app is a much more well-suited solution to do that from. And again, VM to VM firewalling within a trust zone. So one use case that I'll talk about soon is around not allowing VMs, desktops, for example, virtual machines to talk to each other. Or frankly, servers, for that matter. Why do they need to talk to each other? They're just providing services. Desktops typically don't need to talk to each other. Why? Because unless we're doing peer-to-peer file sharing, which I hope we're not doing in our networks, or maybe you want to prevent that from happening, we can leverage something like this and say everything within this zone can't talk to each other, can only talk out. Kind of like private VLANs, except moving up the stack a little bit higher. And again, you don't have to worry about overlapping IPs. Again, if you want to use both, if you want to use avoid the use of VLANs as a network segmentation technique. So both of these can kind of handle that. Again, with the network isolation on vShield Edge, and again, vShield App with more of the logical zoning. And then the need for both. So you need the vShield Edge features, like DHCP, NAT, et cetera, but you also want to have that intra-zone firewalling, so the VM within the zone. So you have a combination of the two. This is going to me, there it goes. This is going to be, to me, probably the biggest use case that you're going to see. You're going to probably end up using both. So we talk about security journey, right? We talk about the journey to the cloud from just a general perspective. Let's talk about it from a security perspective. Goal here is to go from these air gap pods, right? You have your different network zones, web app zone, in this case, a multi-tier app. You have PCI, non-PCI, CD in scope, out of scope, whatever. Different zones within your network typically go away from this issue of having to physically separate these to start going with the mixed trust zones on a single infrastructure. So you have your mixed trust zones, now your web app and database tier in this example, now they're mixed. And then in the longer run, we go to our private clouds. And when we say private clouds, again, we've got your service provider out there, your tenant A, tenant B, but then we want to connect that up so you can have vShield Edge in here, protecting between these tenants. And then tenant A at their main data center, you want to make sure that they have secure connectivity back from their virtual data center. They can do that through the service, through the VPN capabilities, for example. So this is kind of the goal here, the movement, and to be able to do this in a secure manner, right? The cloud, biggest objection out there is around security. So that's what we're trying to do here, is address some of those questions and some of those risks that get brought up. So let's talk use cases. Yeah, we're about halfway in, so this should be good. We should have good on time here. So we're going to talk about Global Limited. They're a fictional company here, and their current air-gapped infrastructure. Again, they've got dedicated switches and a load balancer. The firewall rules all apply up here at the distribution layer of each of these zones. Your mixed trust zones, there's mixed trust workloads actually, maybe say in the DMZ environment, so they're doing this, but they really don't have any security between those zones. So they've got, their app zone database, the different zones within there, but there's no security between those per se. Again, if there are, you basically have VLANs or subnets, but then you have to go back out to the firewall and back in, and it's not very efficient, not very, again, the ability to take advantage of the virtualization fully. From a complexity standpoint, a lot of VLAN sprawl, so they're dealing with a lot of that, a lot of blind spots in their intervening traffic, and then again, those performance bottlenecks. They have to go out and in and out and in for this traffic. So, key requirements. From a security trust zoning perspective, we're going to kind of talk about these different use cases. So from an extranet, they've got partners that need to connect into their network. How are they going to do that? And access their inventory apps. And also, restrict those partners only to specific apps. So once they're in, they should only be able to get in and only see what they need to see and not anybody else's information. From a PCI perspective, we need to segment the cardholder data environments, right? And then also, retail point of sale, secure access to the data center. So your point of sale devices, how can we make sure we have secure access from those point of sale systems back into the data center apps that are on the back end? From a view desktop perspective, again, and some of these will kind of overlap, but from a view desktop perspective, again, we have multiple users and functionality desktops. They want to know how they're going to go ahead and provide separation between their desktops. One of the huge benefits of View is we're moving our desktops into the data center. Why not be able to zone your desktops like you do your servers internally? It's really hard to do that physically when you have your desktops distributed all over the place, but you get them in the data center, you can really start to do some interesting stuff. So we'll kind of hit on that. And then from a DMZ perspective, again, segmentation from the internal network, of course, web load balancing as well. And then we'll talk a bit about the internal cloud with VMware vCloud Director. I suggest you go to the vCloud Director sessions, check out the labs as well, because that's where you're going to get a lot more detail on this use case. So, from the extranet use case, we got our partner out here. They need to have access into their inventory app. Matter of fact, maybe we have multiple partners out here. We can set up the site-to-site VPN first for these partners, and they're going to have access to their individual VMs, their inventory app itself. But we don't want them, again, to be able to access anything else. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set a port group up and use port group isolation to provide the layer 2 segmentation of this port group. So this virtual data center, essentially. Our partner gets in, they connect through the site-to-site VPN, and they're connected into their port group. First thing we do is set deny all configuration on vShield Edge. So we don't want to leave it open. Everything gets denied by default. But then we create a static inbound net set up for secure. So it's HTTP web server access, and then RDP access to their servers. So they're able to RDP to those servers. So they can manage those servers and, again, dealing with our partner from an inventory perspective. So what we'll need to do is set up a rule to allow port 443 and 3389 from our partner sites, again, their IP range. We're also going to set up a VPN. Probably do this up here. Maybe not necessarily in this order. So let's not take the order specific. But we'll set up the site-to-site VPN. So now we've got a IPsec VPN between those sites. And again, this is just our virtual data center. We didn't have to set up a full site-to-site VPN between our edge router or our edge firewall and their environment. We just do it at the virtual data center because that's all they need access to. And even if it goes deep into the network, if you will, their virtual data center, that's the only thing that they're going to be able to see, quote, extending of their network using this VPN. And then again, we can leverage vShield app here now to say, these different levels of apps. Maybe we have multiple partners coming through here for whatever reason. We can use vShield app to separate that out. Now, maybe you would use vShield Edge to actually have multiple partners, and they would have multiple data centers, virtual data centers that they would connect to. But the VPN key thing is important. But then even through the VPN, we could limit what ports they're able to access through the edge. So that's kind of that use case. Secure view environment. So we can leverage vShield specifically to secure our view environment in a couple of different ways here. First way is to actually protect, the vShield, the view manager, the view connection broker. So that's going to be a key thing that we're going to try to do here. But we also have 3 different types of users with their environment. They've got their corporate users, their overseas developers, and then a pool of desktops that are designed just for web browsing. So they want to have kind of this safe, I like to, the desktop DMZ. It's out there. You can do kind of that dangerous internet-based stuff, but only from, again, that's all you can do from that. So we'll talk about how we can configure that. Again, vShield app can provide that secure view environment. vShield Edge can provide the VPN or the site-to-site VPN for our overseas developers and our internal, and our for our web browsing only, and then for our corporate users that may be remote or what have you, then you would use some other form of VPN because, again, we don't use a user-based VPN, so we'll not hit on that too much. But again, we'll have a view VM to another view VM deny, so that's a key policy that we want to have here. Any VMs, again, I don't believe desktops have really any good reason to talk to each other. They're a means to get to your, the services that they need to provide. Desktops should not be providing services. And again, so peer-to-peer file sharing and all of that, we can provide the VM protection leveraging vShield app. So we say deny all. Within this group, one VM to another, don't allow it. But maybe for these, for the web-based ones, we say the VM view, or the view VM, is able to access the internet over port 80. Maybe you add 443 there as well. But the point is, maybe you don't want to allow FTP traffic. Maybe you do. Again, it's dangerous, so we can set up a rule here to allow only that specific traffic, but nothing else. And again, container-based policy for ease of configuration. So our containers, we talk VMware View. Again, we're going to provide a number of components here, but the endpoint protection, the vShield app for the desktop security zones that I mentioned, again, vShield Edge for the load balance view manager servers, as well as encrypting the traffic, the VPN traffic for our site-to-site VPNs. So here's the basic steps that we would kind of follow. And I kind of talked, if anybody was in the last session, I kind of went through this exact same set of slides here. But I did want to talk about it in both contexts here. So, we talk about View Manager. What are we going to configure on there? Again, we create our desktop pools. Key thing is, the desktop pools should be created to actually use, where do I say it here? Oh, I don't know where I say it here, but I say it for resource pools. So one of the things, we have a choice when we create our desktop pools is to use folders or use resource pools to store those desktops. Key thing you'll want to do, we don't leverage folders yet in the VM view. We're going to leverage the resource pools that you'll get in your host and clusters view. So you can leverage resource pools, and you can do those. So what I would say is make sure you use the resource pool capability to store your desktops, because then we can start leveraging them from a vShield perspective. Set up your role-based access controls to restrict that access to the different pools to the administrators. Again, I kind of talked about this yesterday, but leverage the capabilities within View to separate who can access what. So you don't have a administrator from a remote site, say your contractor site, and you've got an administrator that's managing that, and your contractor calls you up and says, hey, I need access to some other servers within your environment, but I can't get through now. So, can you move my desktop to a different zone? And that administrator shouldn't be doing that without checking with a higher level administrator or somebody who manages that other zone. That's where the role-based access controls can come in to prevent them from being able to do that. Again, leverage EAD groups. From a vCenter perspective, again, create those resource pools for your different desktop pools, and then set up the role-based access controls in vCenter as well. But here's the key area that we want to look at here is how are we going to configure vShield app to deal with this? So again, based on the desktop pools, determine the application access needed by users. So each user, again, you'd have those desktop pools set up, and they would be in the resource pool. So you need to set your policy. You need to know, what are these users? So my internal users, what are the services that they need access to? And you can even start carving that up even deeper. You may have accounting users. You may have HR users that only need to access certain resources. You can really start carving things up in a fairly simple way to start kind of breaking this out and then really provide security. So not only are you given the standard authentication controls that you typically have and authorization to those apps, but you can also cut them off from a network perspective so then you can't even bother to try to authenticate. But the key thing we want to do here is create a cluster data center level, at the data center level, based on the resource pools. Say the source PCI desktops to, say, PCI servers in this case. Allow HTTPS, so the desktops need access to servers. We kind of talk point of sale, and allow that. But again, we're still going to have that default deny rule that should deny everything else. But then again, if you wanted to say you did have an allow rule within a zone, But you can also create one, say you don't want the contractor's VMs to, and again, I've got a typo here. It should be say contractor zone to contractor zone, deny all. That's going to prevent any VM within the zone from talking to each other. So you get pretty granular there. So when we start talking PCI compliance, some of the key things here, again, what we can do here is, again, you can use a View Desktop pool for housing your PCI apps, right? So your different PCI, the point of sale apps. So again, assign those desktops to the specific port group. So you'd have a View or a PCI desktop group. Use vShield Edge to provide the site-to-site VPN. So maybe your point of sale apps, you want to provide site-to-site VPN between your stores and the data center environment. Use vShield Edge to provide that site-to-site VPN between those point of sale apps. Use the web load balancer for the view managers because everything's going to be encrypted, so you don't necessarily need to use a security server there, so you can now use the unencrypted method. And then again, do the stateful firewall between those desktops and the CDE servers, not to mention using vShield app to isolate those PCI environments from the rest of the cardholder environments or the non-CDE environments. So again, leverage port group isolation. That's going to be a key thing that you want to do for those View desktops and frankly for the View servers, or excuse me, the PCI desktops and the PCI servers. And again, DHCP into that View environment, so leverage that to assign the IP addresses. And then again, isolation between the desktops, but within the resource pools themselves, as well as from the rest of the environment. And then again, same isolation for the CDE environment, the servers, as discussed earlier. So PCI, here's kind of what it would look like here. Here's our site-to-site VPN. We've got our this is our store. I didn't get a real good icon. It looks like an office building, but we've got a store down on the first floor here. That's talking back to our main data center. We can have an IPsec VPN between that and to get to the View desktops. Users would access their View desktop, but from their View desktop, we can also set up, and this is something that I was playing with actually earlier in the lab. I was just kind of goofing around, but basically we can set up a site-to-site VPN between our View environment and the PCI environment. So, there's requirements around encrypting the traffic, all the CDE traffic. Well, say our apps, our PCI apps, were not, SSL-based yet, or, that we don't have the encryption in the apps. Why not set up the site-to-site VPN here to encrypt the communications between those View desktops and the PCI, the server environment? Another nice way to do that. And again, you create the site-to-site VPN, you put these in one port group, this in another port group, and again, we protect those. And then within, again, configured on vShield app, is, again, the resource pools to deny all these desktops from talking to each other directly. So, again, a lot of capabilities here that we can do, again, with both Edge and app together. And that's the key thing. I think there's a lot of cases where you're going to kind of combine the use of these. It's not always going to be one or the other. I think it's going to be the combination of the use. But the nice thing about that is it's all managed from one management console, and you can automate all of this through the REST API capabilities. So again, once we're in that PCI, the CDE environment, again, we can have our different levels here. So our database, and this is in the server resource pool, but our database servers, our app servers, and our web servers. And again, this is based on resource pools that the database servers, again, we set up these different zones. Here we would say a default deny all between all zones, between the zones and from the outside. We have a allow TCP 1433 between the app server zone and the database server zone. We have an allow port 5000. That's just a random port I picked, but from the web server zone to the app zone. And then from the web server resource pool, we can allow port 80 and 443 from anywhere, but then deny everything within the zone itself. So again, you're setting up your multi-tier environment, all with logical zoning. We didn't set up a single VLAN here. We didn't have to separate this physically per se, but we're providing the required stateful inspection that PCI requires through the use of these tools. Now, disclaimer here, this is brand new, so we've not taken this to a QSA. But there is work being done within the PCI Council. There's a virtualization special interest group, so hopefully we can get even more guidance here. But the point is, we can do this. It's just a matter of, it's a matter of making it, putting it into practice and then getting an approved reference architecture for this. And that's what we're working on as well. So some reference architectures around how to do these different things. We'll have an initial one coming out here soon, but over time you're going to see more and more different types of architectures. I'm actually working on one that we're going to talk about as far as protecting management networks. And we want to potentially have a reference architecture. So we always talk about the best practice, protect your management network, right? Firewall that off. Potentially we can use these tools. We need to be careful about how we do it so we don't kind of black hole ourselves and lock ourselves in if we lose a an edge appliance goes down or something, and all of a sudden you're blocked out. So there's ways that we can do that, though, to make sure that you don't, but you're still in those protected zones. We'll talk about that eventually once we kind of come out with those reference architectures. So load balancing, again, for your web servers, pretty simple here, but we use vShield Edge here to load balance the web servers within in the DMZ itself. Frankly, you can web balance the load servers in the PCI environment, but the point is, again, it's HTTP load balancing. We're not doing HTTPS yet. So at this point, it's just classic HTTP. But if you're already behind the VPN and you've got VPN connectivity within maybe the cardholder data environment, then you can just use that VPN and then use the load balancing capabilities as well. If you're talking public internet, if you need to have an HTTPS environment, if it's just simple HTTP, maybe intranet, or even, again, a simple HTTP web farm for your basic public web servers, this is a good tool to leverage for that. I don't know why those builds are in there. So here's kind of where we fit, kind of our mixed trust environment, right? This is kind of where we finish up. Again, your trust zones set up with both vShield Edge and or app. Again, your sensitive PCI data is protected. And again, the firewall rules apply at each level. So now you've got that layered defense as well. I mean, we can have rules coming from the outside on vShield Edge. We can also have those additional rules on vShield app. So one layer fails, the other layer can protect it. I was actually talking to one of my counterparts based out of the UK. He was talking to one of his customers about, they love this because now they still have their edge-based firewall, but now they can do a layered defense with a different vendor built right into the virtualization platform. So if there's a vulnerability found in that edge-based firewall, they still have additional protection from a different vendor again. Because once you start getting the environments where you're using the same exact vendor on each one, typically you're probably going to, even if you're doing the internal firewalling, if you're going to have a vulnerability in one layer, it's going to go all the way through. So this is going to help protect against that. Or that's a really good use case to provide that additional layered defense. So on the journey to the cloud, so again, the key thing here is maybe you've got a East Coast data center and a West Coast data center, and you want to set up the cloud for that. Again, vCloud Director can span across those multiple data centers, set up the VPN between those with vShield Edge, and again, can all be set up with the REST APIs, and again, use the templates, et cetera, to do that. And here's kind of what it would look like. Here's a quick look, and our name was Cloud Director at the time. Now it's vCloud Director. So point being is here, the vCloud Director is going to span across those multiple data centers and provide the protection, and will automatically configure the vShield components for you that you would need. Right away, it only leverages vShield Edge, which is included, and certain components of that, but over time, you'll see more and more integration. So for more details on different types of sessions here, again, vShield Edge and app, there's a good one on just an architectural overview and security for the cloud by, I believe, Alwyn Sequeira is doing this one. He kind of runs our whole security products group in engineering. Endpoint security, again, I mentioned there's 3 sessions. I would definitely try to hit one of these. This will go really deep into this offloaded AV. And then this agentless antivirus, this also talks about this as well. I believe this is a joint presentation between our partner, Trend Micro in particular, and VMware on this one. So, a whole bunch more sessions. I'm going to leave this up right now. And got about 10, 15 minutes for questions. Sir? Yeah, so I think we will have, eventually, further down the road, it'll be more configurable what ports you want, not non-standard ports and those types of things. Yeah, again, roadmap type item, though. Yes? vShield apps, that's installed per host, correct? Does it fail open or closed? It fails closed by default right now. So what happens to the VMs? They disappear off the network? They're off the network at that point, and they can migrate to another host and then be back online. DRS doesn't leverage that just yet, but DRS DRS and I should say HA will deal with that vShield app going down, and it'll restart it. So we've got the intelligence in that. We've also got some monitoring in that where we'll restart a VM right from vShield. The vShield manager will do that as well. So we've got some redundancy there as well. Sir, I'll get you, Chris. You go next. The flow data itself is not, actually, no, it's not exportable, but we can send all of the, you can send all of the events out via syslog. So you can do syslog to like a SIM, but that's specific to the firewall rules. You typically don't want to send every last thing out there. Well, you know what, I take that back. Using the REST APIs, I believe you can pull all that flow data. I'd have to confirm that, though. Multi what? Multicast support? I don't know. I'd have to ask about that. But I think it is, as far as I know, it is supported. I'd have to confirm on that. Chris? Yes. Only one vShield app per ESX host. Right. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. We'll have to sit down and figure that out. But as far as, so you'd have multiple edges for one, because really you typically have one edge for per virtual data center. So you wouldn't have, there's no, right. Yep. Right. Yeah, so from a performance standpoint, we've tested up to, I believe it's, I think it was 5 gig. Is that right? Yeah, so 5 gig is kind of the performance number that we've seen so far between that we can sustain through one vShield Edge appliance. So, and you're talking virtual data center, so you're not talking like it's a huge choke point type environment, you know, where it's a big, where you're going to have a huge, I mean, you could potentially have a pretty big network behind it. That's a good point. So that's a good point. That may be something that we have to look at the roadmap. But today it would be one per, so there's no kind of load balancing capability on that just yet. Yeah. Sir? Oh. It's transparent to that. The only thing that doesn't work with it would be the network isolation piece, because that's kind of our layer 2 segmentation piece, so you would have to use our virtual switch for that. But everything else is completely transparent because, I mean, the vShield app is that vNIC level firewall, so that's the vNIC. It doesn't matter what the switch is that it's plugging into. So it kind of sits between that, if you will. And then vShield Edge is just more like a routing firewall. So actually, if you have physical machines, for example, you can still use VLANs and put those behind a vShield Edge as well. So those will route through it because it's essentially a router. You make that its default gateway. So that's it. The third-party virtual switches don't matter from that. Sir? Yes. It's only a virtual appliance. The question was, is vShield a virtual appliance? Yes. The vShield Manager is what you install. And then from the vShield Manager, it will deploy the vShield Edge and vShield app appliances for you. So you don't put those in by yourself. Okay. You know what? I'm having a hard time. Can you talk into the mic up here? I can't hear you. Oh, he's going to turn it up for you. Go for it. There you go.
Okay. So we are actually building another security solution addressing a different part of the virtualization security, and we would want to integrate the vShield functionality also into that appliance. Is that possible? Because I believe that it was possible using VMsafe. I'm not sure.
Right. So the way you would have to do that now is you would leverage vShield functionality and you would use the REST APIs. So you can be kind of the manager to provide that. So like say you're an IDS or something like that, or again, we could probably talk offline, but the vShield,
I'll talk to you offline.
The REST APIs to vShield is that new
No, I don't want to have 2 appliances. I'm looking at having just one appliance, but integrate the functionality which we are developing plus what vShield provides into just one appliance instead of saying that you need to have 2 appliances now.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have to put one of your appliances on every single host, though.
Yeah.
You would just have one. right? And then you would talk that one, or maybe two for redundancy, whatever, but that would talk to the vShield manager, which is just one.
Okay.
And then you would have the vShield manager would send the REST calls, you would send your REST calls right to the vShield manager, and it would configure the policies that you would want it to configure on your side.
Okay. And is there a way, I mean, now, I'm not sure what the status of VM Safe is, but can we integrate with VM Safe as well?
We can talk about that offline
at
some point. So I think I had one over here. I'll get to you. I'll get you. In essence, yeah. I mean, vShield app you can almost think of as layer one, right down to the physical, but the virtual NIC. But yeah, I mean that's where but it applies policies layer 2, layer 3, and up. Where vShield Edge is more of a router, right? So, yeah. Actually, I had one more before, and I'll get to you. Go ahead.
Is this all still in beta?
It's beta 2 right now. It's set to release today. So it actually did it. I must have. So thank you.
Is that 4.0 and 4.1?
Yes. Yes. Now the network isolation you need. No, I'm sorry. The endpoint security piece you need 4.1, but vShield Edge and App are all 4.0. Will work with.
So how is this different from the Cisco Nexus 1000 switch?
The Cisco Nexus 1000V is a switch. I mean, it'll provide basic port-based ACLs. They're not stateful. They're not really logical. You can't do any kind of logical zoning. That's a layer 2 switch, the Nexus 1000V. We're getting up higher layers than that. Get to you next. Benchmark the performance impact. Yeah, we've done some performance impact benchmarking internally. That's like I kind of mentioned. vShield Edge will sustain about a 5 gig throughput. vShield App, I'm not positive what the numbers are on that, but I know we are doing some work on that. You've got somebody right near you that can probably answer those questions for you. So, yeah. It's minimal, if at all. I mean, I forget what the number was. It was something in the microseconds. Yeah, sir. Yeah, so the way you would do it is through those REST APIs, and there's we've got documentation on those REST APIs. So your external firewall, say it's an IPS, and it detects again a machine that's compromised or that's doing something bad, and you want to isolate it. You can send a REST command through to the vShield manager, and then it'll configure the VM and the vShield app to actually protect. Okay. Oh, okay. I see. So you're the outsourcer, or you out? Okay, and you're using an outsourcing solution. Yeah, theoretically they can manage it. I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't, and they can theoretically do it through the APIs as well. So it's just a matter of their manager, their solution, to be able to talk to vShield Manager through those APIs. That's the suggested way to go, or use our management interface if they don't want to integrate to the API. Sir?
Yeah, will vCenter have other view permissions for
the zoning? Right, that's a good question. So you can leverage some of the permissions already for the zoning. It'd be based on, for example, vShield Edge, right? It requires port group access. So by leveraging the networking-based permissions to not allow access to the different port groups, that's how you can do that. You can also, for vShield app, same type of thing. For your resource pools and those types of things, you can limit who has access to those and only allow authorized administrators, for example, to create that. Or you just don't allow network access or resource pool access, if you will, from as far as moving VMs around, changing networks and those types of things. Nothing specific to vShield yet. Not yet. So if you really wanted to keep it fully separate, don't use the vSphere client API. Or don't use the plugin, and only do it from the vShield Manager, and then only your security team goes right to the vShield Manager and nothing else. That's the way to do it. Sir?
How are you guys going to position this going forward against your partners like Alpha?
Yeah, we're still going to support the APIs. Those are still going to be out there for our current customers that have those, they're the current partners that are using those APIs. In many ways, we kind of overlap some functionality, but we also have separate functionality as well. So, we're going to still work with our partners, obviously, and again, still work with them. But there's some stuff. Again, we had a lot of our customers come to us and say, "We want you to do some stuff in this area as well. We want you to leverage your own APIs as well," which is why we're doing that. But again, we will still work with our partners. We're going to support our partners and allow that. And again, the program, as far as the folks that are in there for VM Safe, they will still have access to those, and we're still going to continue to work with them on that. I can't answer that. I don't know. Yeah, I'd love to be able to, but that's out of my purview. Anything else? Sir? It's actually, vShield Zones 4.1 is included with Advanced and Higher. vShield Edge, App, and Endpoint are bundled in certain things, but there's a separate SKU for those. So those are per VM pricing. That's how that's going to work, the licensing. So, and again, we talk offline about list pricing, and I don't know about all the pricing specifically, other than it's per VM, and basically, again, you'll be able to license based on Edge. You can get separately from App. You can bundle them, but you can like Edge, for example, is included with vCloud Director. App is included with Endpoint is included with App, actually. So if you buy App, you get Endpoint. But Endpoint is also included with View Premier. So if you buy View Premier, you get that as well. So there's a number of bundling options there as well.
When you said per VM, you mean per virtual firewall VM?
No, actually per VM that you're protecting. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, good. One more. We haven't applied for it yet. Probably 1.0 version. We probably won't do FIPS compliance right off the bat. Let's get to our next version. It's you know how expensive that and common criteria. We are going to get ISCA certification though on this version, so that's already kind of going in process. But the government certifications, we're going there, but not yet. We hadn't looked at that one as far as I know. Again, the ISCA kind of I think covers some of that. So. Thank you, everybody.